Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conservative Coffee Hour. I'm Stanley Smith, and it's January 2022. It's almost a year now that Lawrence and I have been hosting Conservative Coffee Hour, and we started that because we really thought there was a need for some messaging and some talking points that voters and candidates and elected officials could use to maybe better articulate some of the themes and topics that we felt were being lost in the shuffle of the political environment. And almost a year later, we've covered a lot of topics. This holiday season, I was reacquainted with the film The Sound of Music, and my favorite things. I mean, the topics we've had are crime and social justice, the economy, gross domestic product, abortion, climate change, and gun violence and mental health. We've we've covered almost all of my favorite things. And when I'm feeling down or blue, I have to say, I'm not sure if recounting all my favorite things necessarily makes me feel any better or not, but it's been so terrific talking to people and meeting candidates and hearing from diverse individuals from all over the state and all over the country. I was reminded recently that the United States is indeed that 50 United States, and we looked at the nation as 50 individual states. We could see that there is indeed diversity and how conservative values might be manifest in places like Texas or Florida. Florida might not quite be how we might manifest them here, but that's okay because that's part of diversity and part of the way our system is set up. I also found hope in that we do have these individual states and we do have a federal government, but we do not have centralized government. And I think that's important, and that does make me feel a little bit better when I'm feeling blue. This week at the Conservative Coffee Hour, Lawrence sent us a list of topics that he's considering or continuing to pursue in the new year. He wasn't able to attend until the very end, but the thing he's honing in on is the election of the voter rolls. So I think we hear a lot more about the election, audit of the election, the last presidential election and local elections, but he's honing in on the idea that the rolls themselves need to be audited because it's probably mistakes and errors and things that would benefit probably the Democratic ticket more than the Republican ticket as far as mistakes or irregularities or out and out misdoing. On paper, of course, there are more registered. I do hate the term registered because there's really no such thing as registered Republican or Democrat, but there are more Democrat voters on paper than there are Republicans. So any error margin is probably going to benefit the voting bloc, the Democratic side, more than the Republican side. And ironically, there are more elected officials in bureaucracy from the Democratic side, so they're probably somewhat reluctant to really pick up the banner of auditing election rolls or taking a close look at election irregularities, perhaps. But as we've discerned Conservative Coffee over the last year, that in fact, most voters are indeed swing voters, and especially on important issues. I was intrigued during the Obama presidential election that so many people, I worked as election judge, came into the poll that day telling us they had not voted in many years, but they came in because they wanted to vote for Mr. Obama. And we were happy to issue them a ballot. And I was amused and rather annoyed when people would bound out of the voting booth in just literally seconds and hand us their ballot. And I knew it was impossible for them to have completed the entire ballot. And they would state, oh, I just came in to vote for Mr. Obama. And they had no interest in voting for anyone else on the ticket, the representatives, judges, or any of the initiatives. And looking back, I've kind of looked beyond my annoyance and realized that something else that was telling us, it was telling us that these people who had not voted in many years and didn't bother to fill out the rest of the ballot, you know what? They were discouraged, obviously, by the system and didn't think their vote made a difference. And now, in retrospect, looking back, that is very telling. After Mr. Obama was elected for office, I was intrigued by the fact that there was such a tremendous amount of excitement about his election as what people viewed him to be as a change agent, and how quickly that excitement seemed to evaporate. And the comments were that he simply was not doing enough and not acting fast enough. And again, looking back at that, I can see that, well, that's because he was part of the system, became part of the system, and the system was really running the show. Um, in all these topics, I think one thing we've been zoning in on is the idea of where is our voice in all this? And I think we can see increasingly that we have elected officials on the Democrat side and the Republican side, and they're really in it for the system. And that is something that you need to wrap your head around because we think, of course, they're there to represent us, but really they're there ultimately representing the system. Even if they have good intentions, the system is all consuming and it's absorbing all the resources and all the time and energy to simply support the system. And there isn't a lot of room for us. This week, Lawrence reminded us that we want to support candidates, and I'm certainly all for that. I think we definitely need to support and celebrate anyone who's emerging as a candidate. But Lawrence also warned us that we have to watch out for these Republican, right-wing Republicans or nut jobs. And again, I'm somewhat discouraged by that because that's probably not a helpful idea because, in fact, any conservative person or Republican candidate is going to be painted as a right-wing nut job. And I always point to the candidate of Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney was, I think we can safely say, was probably, and probably still is, the nicest person on the planet. But during his presidential election, he was maligned as being a nut job, a right-wing person. And if he had been elected, God love him, I mean, we would have found out that he was, at least in the media's eyes, truly the devil incarnate. So I think that's a losing proposition to try to screen out the right-wing nut jobs because we are all right-wing nut jobs. Also on the call, it came up the idea again of having a list. Why can't we have a list of all these terrific people we need to be supporting? And as I mentioned before, I find that somewhat problematic because the idea of a list or top-down initiative reeks really more of a machine as opposed to a grassroots organization. And I think on the conservative side, I think that's what we're trying to embrace, is that we are indeed a grassroots organization as opposed to a machine, which is more akin to how the Democrat Party runs. And so I think that's, again, something we need to continue to weigh, is that there are challenges and issues that are going to come up with a grassroots organization, which is intrinsically messy and problematic. Whereas a machine, you know what? We live in downtown Chicago, and Chicago is the epitome of the city that works. And machine has many, many advantages. And part of that is organization and control and a clear direction. So again, things to consider in the new year. And lastly, in all these meetings and conversations, my goal has been to discern some sort of messaging on all these topics, but background, I'm really looking for the silver bullet. What is it that's going to really be the catalyst for our entire message and put the pin in the balloon that blows up this entire structure, which is really working against us? So I think recently the topic of that we're battling communism could be the silver bullet if we couch things in those terms, which sound extreme, but I think that's probably closer to what is going on than we think. And also the idea that increasingly we have free states and slave states, which again sounds a little extreme, but could be helpful, painting in people's minds the picture that in some states our rights and privileges are being taken away, and other states they're doing a better job of preserving our rights and privileges. So those are things to consider in the new year. If you'd like to join us and help us discern some of these major topics and navigate into 2022, I would be happy to see you here, and I will include my email in the description. And I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.